There's a moment, a quiet, almost imperceptible moment, when someone questions your integrity, mocks your path, or twists your words. And without thinking, you do what you were trained to do. You defend, you explain, you try to make them understand. But here's the truth, no one ever told you. Every time you rush to justify yourself, you hand over something sacred, your peace, your presence, your power. The Stoics warned us not to be ruled by the opinions of others, and yet we hand our dignity over the second someone misreads our silence, our strength, our stillness. Why? Because deep down, most people would rather be understood than be in control. They'd rather be liked than be respected. But that's not the Stoic way. The Stoic doesn't chase validation. They become the kind of person who doesn't need it. We're going to talk about the power of restraint, the psychology of silence, and why refusing to defend yourself may be the most commanding move you'll ever make. Because when you stop explaining, you stop being predictable. And when you're no longer predictable, you become untouchable. If you're someone who's tired of being misread, tired of reacting, tired of feeling like you're always on trial, then stay with me. This isn't just philosophy, this is strategy, and it's going to change the way you carry yourself in every room, every conversation, and every challenge that comes your way. If you're on a path to becoming more grounded, more unshakable, and more in control of your own narrative, then subscribe. Because every step you take toward wisdom is a step away from needing the world's approval. Do you know why it hurts so much when someone misjudges you? It's not just the words they say, it's that quiet desperation inside of you, the part that believes you can fix it. If you just explain your side clearly enough, if you say the right thing, maybe they'll see the truth, maybe they'll see you. But the Stoics warned us, the need to be understood is a trap. It feels noble, it feels honest, but it's not strength. It's a reaction, and reactions are emotional reflexes, not strategic moves. When you rush to defend, when your instinct is to clarify, to plead your case, you've already handed something over. You've made their perception more important than your peace. You've entered their frame, agreed to their rules, and started fighting a battle on their terms. And that's the first step toward losing yourself, because in that moment, you become tangled. You try to untie the knots they've thrown at you, hoping to return to neutral. But neutral isn't something you can reach through explanation. It's something you hold through presence. The more you explain, the more you shrink. You're no longer standing firm in who you are. You're asking for permission to exist. And here's a deeper truth most people don't want to admit. Anyone who truly knows you doesn't need your explanation, and anyone demanding one, they rarely deserve it. You don't owe everyone a window into your mind. You don't owe everyone your peace. The Stoics knew this well. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are pained by external things, it is not they that disturb you, but your own judgment of them. And when you defend yourself emotionally, it's not them you're serving, it's your own fear." See, the person who reacts is easy to predict. You poke, they flinch. You accuse, they explain. You press, they crumble. But the person who doesn't react, that person becomes something else entirely. They become unreadable. They observe, they wait, they remain still. They don't respond to prove their worth. They let the silence speak for them. And in that silence, something strange happens. People start to question their own assumptions. The energy flips. The person who expected a performance is left staring into stillness, and that stillness forces them to face themselves. Now, you might think that silence makes you look guilty, that if you don't explain, people will assume the worst. But ask yourself this: what kind of power does it take to stay quiet when being accused? What kind of strength does it require to hold your ground? Say nothing and let it pass through you. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And defending yourself emotionally is one of those things. We speak to avoid discomfort. We explain to soothe insecurity. But the Stoic, they endure the discomfort. They master the insecurity, because they know that inner stability is far more valuable than outer approval. It's easy to talk. It's easy to rush to justify, to smooth things over, to be liked. But easy is rarely powerful. The hard thing, the uncomfortable thing, is to remain rooted when your character is questioned. Not because you don't care, but because you care about the right things. You care about self-control. You care about principle. You care about your ability to remain undisturbed in a world that demands your reaction. That's the Stoic way. Not passive, not cold, but clear. Clear on who you are and unwilling to hand that clarity over for temporary comfort. And there's something else. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop giving people material to work with. They want your words so they can twist them. They want your explanations so they can find holes. But if you remain quiet, composed, still, they have nothing. You become a mirror. They begin to talk more, to reach further, to overplay. Their accusations start to sound desperate. Their emotions become loud. And your silence, that becomes the loudest thing in the room. It's not avoidance. It's dominance. But not the aggressive kind, the centered kind. The kind that holds power not by force, but by the refusal to be shaken. Most people don't understand this because they're addicted to validation. They want everyone to get them. They need to feel seen. But again, the Stoics offer a different path. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Why? Because chasing approval bends your spine. You become a performer in your own life. You speak not from wisdom, but from anxiety. And every time you explain yourself to someone who doesn't care to listen, you lose a piece of that backbone. The more you explain, the more they control the story. The more you hold still, the more they start to doubt their version of it. This is how power shifts quietly, not with loud declarations or clever comebacks, but with stillness, with composure. The person who stands in calm when chaos is thrown at them holds something unshakable. They communicate not just with their words, but with their presence. And presence is harder to argue with than any defense. People may not understand you. Let them. They may think you're arrogant, cold, distant. Let them. They may misjudge your silence as guilt. Let them. Because once you learn how to sit in the discomfort of being misunderstood, you become free. Free from the need to please, free from the need to prove, free from the cage of constant explanation. And here's the twist. When you stop trying to be understood, people actually start respecting you more. Not because you gave them what they wanted, but because you showed them something they couldn't shake. Inner control, quiet strength. That rare kind of discipline that says, I don't need to react to be in control. I don't need to speak to be heard. That's the power most people never find, because they're too busy explaining. You are not a courtroom witness for your own character. You don't need to cross-examine your own intentions. You don't need to build a case for your own heart. Let your actions speak over time. Let your life reflect your truth. And when someone throws stones, don't catch them to explain. Let them fall. Because when you stay still while others scramble for validation, your presence becomes undeniable. Not because you shouted the truth, but because you lived it without needing to. So the next time someone misjudges you, pauses the moment. Let the urge to explain pass through you like a wave. Feel it, but don't obey it. Let them say what they will. Let them spin their stories. You're not there to edit their narrative. You're there to live yours, fully, quietly, powerfully. And when the noise fades, when the accusations grow quiet, you'll still be standing, untouched, unshaken, and deeply at peace. Not because you fought to be understood, but because you chose not to fight at all. That is strength. That is Stoicism. That is freedom. Think back to the last time someone accused you of something. Maybe they questioned your motives, threw shade at your intentions, or said something that felt completely unfair. Your first instinct was probably to respond, to explain, to tell your side of the story. But ask yourself honestly, did it help? Or did it leave you feeling smaller, like you were trying to prove your right to exist, like you were shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's version of the truth? The need to justify is powerful, but it's rarely empowering. The Stoics understood this long before we put it into words. They knew that the moment you begin to react, you've already moved off center. You've let someone else tug on the strings of your mind. You've become a puppet to their provocation. See, the world teaches you that silence is weakness, that if you don't defend yourself, you must be guilty. But silence is not emptiness. Silence is ambiguity. And ambiguity, by its very nature, makes people hesitate. It introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty disrupts control. When someone accuses you and you don't respond, when you remain completely composed, something strange begins to happen. The room pauses. The energy shifts. Even if no words are spoken, the silence itself becomes an event. The accuser starts looking around, searching for agreement, for affirmation, for proof that their jab landed. But the more they look, the more they start to squirm. Because the attention isn't just on what was said, it's now on how you're reacting, or rather, how you're not. And that changes everything. Because now the focus is no longer on their words, it's on your stillness. And people start to wonder, why didn't you say anything? Is it confidence? Is it composure? Is it superiority? Or is it something deeper, something they can't quite put into words? That uncertainty, that space of not knowing, gives you a strange kind of power, because people fear what they can't define. They might not say it out loud, but subconsciously they start creating their own story about your silence. Some will admire it, others will fear it, but almost all will respect it. Because in a world where everyone is quick to react, to over-explain, to argue, the one who holds still becomes the one no one can touch. Stillness, to the Stoic mind, is not about avoidance. It's about command. You're not surrendering when you remain calm. You're reclaiming the space between stimulus and response. That space is sacred. It's where your freedom lives. And when you choose stillness, you're choosing to keep your power instead of handing it away for the cheap reward of temporary validation. Most people respond too quickly because they're afraid of the silence. They feel like it makes them look weak. But what they don't realize is that silence makes them unpredictable, and unpredictability is unsettling. It keeps people cautious. It stops them from pushing too far. When someone attacks you and you don't flinch, you don't fight and you don't explain, they're left holding their own words with nowhere to go. The accusation just floats there, unsupported, and slowly, the weight of it begins to fall back onto them. The Stoics would call this non-resistance. It doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect. It means you don't react emotionally to it. You stay rooted in yourself. Because when you react emotionally, you show your attacker exactly where your buttons are. You teach them how to manipulate you. But when you're still, when you don't respond, you teach them something else entirely. You teach them that you're not on their level. Not because you think you're better, but because you've disciplined yourself to not be pulled into shallow games. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And often, the irritation we feel in silence is a mirror showing us how uncomfortable we are with not being liked, with being misunderstood." But here's the paradox. The more comfortable you become with being misunderstood, the more powerful you appear. Because people don't see someone desperate to explain. They see someone too focused, too centered, too composed to be bothered. They see someone with direction, and that's intimidating in a quiet way. Not aggressive, not loud, just unshakable. The beauty of stillness is that it lets others reveal themselves. The person who speaks first often loses control of the frame. They show their hand. They make themselves vulnerable. But the one who waits, who allows silence to do the heavy lifting, becomes unreadable. And unreadable people are harder to control. They become what the Stoics aspired to be, unmoved by the opinions of the crowd, free from the emotional storms of others, and anchored in their own judgment. That doesn't mean you never speak. It means you only speak when it matters, when the words are sharp, precise, and chosen. Words that don't beg for understanding, but deliver clarity on your terms. Stillness is not weakness, it's strategy. It's what allows you to observe instead of react, to respond from wisdom instead of fear. It gives you time to think, to breathe, to detach. And in that detachment, you gain perspective. You begin to see not just what's being said, but why it's being said. Is it insecurity, jealousy, control? When you aren't caught up in the drama, you can read it clearly. And once you understand it, you're no longer at the mercy of it. You don't dance to other people's emotional rhythms. You set your own tempo. That's real control. But maybe the most important part is this. When you stop reacting, you stop validating. Some people throw accusations just to see if they'll stick. They want to provoke you because your reaction is their confirmation. The louder you respond, the more it looks like they hit something true. But when you say nothing, when you remain calm and detached, it sends a different message. Your words don't move me. And that message shakes people in a way that explanations never could. In time, people notice. They see you not defending, not scrambling, not justifying, and they begin to question the one who is. The crowd starts to shift. They wonder why you're so calm, why you're so still, and slowly they start to lean in your direction, not because you asked them to, but because your composure did what your words never needed to. It showed them strength. So, the next time someone tests you, accuses you, or tries to bait a reaction, try something different. Try stillness. Not as a tactic to appear strong, but as a choice to be strong. Because silence is not the absence of power, it's the presence of it. And those who learn to hold their silence when it matters most become the ones who cannot be shaken. Most people live their lives chasing something they can't hold, approval. They don't call it that, of course. They call it connection, likability, being a good person. But underneath it all is a quiet, anxious desire to be accepted, to be seen as agreeable, kind, easy to love. The need to be liked wraps itself around how we speak, how we act, even how we think. And in doing so, it slowly drains us of our power. The Stoics saw this clearly. They understood that true peace can't be borrowed from someone else's opinion. It has to be built within. Because the world will not always agree with you. People won't always like you. And if your sense of value depends on harmony with others, your identity will always be on the edge of collapse. So what do you do when someone calls you arrogant, cold, selfish? Do you jump in to explain? Do you try to clear the air? Or do you pause, stay grounded, and simply say, that's how you see it? Not sarcastically, not with resentment, just with calm, quiet acceptance. Because that's the moment when everything changes. You stop participating in their emotional game. You don't try to reshape their perception. You let their accusation hang in the air like unfinished music. And in that space, something powerful happens. They start to question themselves. Did they go too far? Were they projecting? Have they said more about their own insecurities than about your character? That's what most people miss. When you don't try to defend or fix their opinion of you, you force them to sit with it. And most people can't. When someone throws a label at you and it doesn't stick, when it just lands with no reaction, they're left alone with their assumptions, and silence in that moment becomes a mirror. It doesn't just reflect your self-control, it reveals their lack of it. You didn't humiliate them, you didn't try to win, you just refused to play, and that's more powerful than anything you could have said. This isn't about mind games or clever comebacks. It's about something deeper. It's about not lowering yourself into emotional combat just to feel seen. When someone tries to provoke you and you stay calm, you're not suppressing your feelings. You're choosing your peace over their noise. You're saying, "My energy is not a reaction to your judgment." That's not coldness. It's clarity. You're not above them. You're simply unwilling to sacrifice your balance to prove your goodness. And the more you live from that place, the less people test you, not because you're feared, but because you're hard to shake. Being liked is nice. It's comforting, but it's not a foundation. And the person who begs to be seen as good gives away something sacred. They give away the right to be misunderstood without unraveling. They hand over their emotional grounding for the approval of people who might not even respect them. Influence doesn't come from being agreeable. It comes from presence, from the feeling people get when they see you hold still in the middle of chaos. That quiet authority doesn't need to raise its voice. It doesn't need to convince. It just exists, unshaken. People can sense when you don't need them to like you. And strangely, that's when they start liking you more. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped trying altogether. You became self-contained. You radiated the kind of confidence that can't be faked, the kind that comes from knowing you're whole without external validation. The world is drawn to that, not to arrogance, but to groundedness, to the kind of presence that says, "I know who I am. You're welcome to misunderstand me. I'm not here to correct that." That's not distance, that's maturity. There's a reason Stoicism still speaks to people today. It doesn't promise that others will always treat you fairly. It doesn't even promise understanding. What it offers is self-possession, the ability to stay inwardly calm when others misunderstand you, to let people be wrong about you and still walk in peace. The more you can do that, the more you become immune to noise. Not numb, not detached, just unaffected. That's not easy, but it's worth everything. We live in a culture obsessed with optics, likes, followers, impressions. But influence isn't about how many people see you. It's about what they feel when they do. And nothing is more striking than someone who doesn't chase the crowd, who doesn't mold themselves for acceptance, who speaks less, but with more weight. That kind of person makes people pause, reconsider, reflect. Not because they explained who they are, but because they didn't have to. So if someone throws a label at you tomorrow, let it land, let it echo, and choose stillness over defense. Choose composure over clarity. Because the people who truly matter won't need your explanation, and the ones who do, their misunderstanding is not your burden to carry. The Stoics believed that we can't control what others say or think, but we can always control the space between what happens and how we choose to respond. That space is where your power lives. Guard it well. And if peace is what you value, don't go looking for it in someone else's approval. Build it within. Let it grow quietly, deeply, until it becomes unshakable. And when you reach that place, when you no longer fear being disliked, you'll find a strange kind of freedom waiting for you. A freedom that doesn't shout or demand. A freedom that simply is. Calm, clear, unapologetically whole. And that's where true influence begins, not in the words you speak, but in the silence you can hold. Imagine you're in a room. A group conversation flowing naturally, until suddenly someone throws a subtle jab at you. Maybe it's about your past. Maybe it's your quietness. Maybe it's the way you carry yourself. It's not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's just sharp enough to sting, and instantly you feel every eye turn to you. There's a silence that follows, an unspoken invitation. Everyone's waiting to see how you'll respond. That's the test. That's the moment most people fail, not because they're weak, but because they think they have to respond. They think saying something will restore balance, dignity, control. But what if you didn't respond? What if you just stayed still, held eye contact, let the moment breathe? Not as a power play, but as a form of deep presence. A presence so grounded, so composed, that it speaks louder than anything you could possibly say. Because at that point, the conversation shifts. It's no longer about what was said, it's about what you chose not to say. Your restraint becomes the message. Your silence becomes a statement. That moment transforms into a mirror, not just for the person who threw the jab, but for everyone watching. And what do they see? Not a victim, not a flinching target, but someone who is so deeply rooted in themselves that no opinion can uproot them. That's not passivity. That's not fear. That's control. And not the kind of control that clenches fists or sharpens comebacks. The kind of control that says, I am untouchable because I know who I am, and I don't need to explain it. The Stoics trained for this. They practiced silence not just as a habit, but as a muscle. They saw restraint as power. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion. There is never a need to get worked up or to trouble your soul about things you can't control." And that includes opinions, shade, subtle attacks. They knew that the ability to stand still in the face of provocation was a deeper strength than any clever rebuttal. Because most people, when challenged, scramble to recover. They talk faster, they explain more, they get louder. But the more they do, the more they lose the room. The more they unravel, the more your stillness speaks. Not about ego, but about stability. You don't win by overpowering them. You win by not needing to. And the contrast becomes obvious. One person talking, reacting, pushing. The other person still, grounded, observing, not absorbing. That stillness doesn't just speak, it redefines the dynamic. It reminds people that power doesn't always look like dominance. Sometimes it looks like not being moved at all. Carl Jung once said, "A man who is unconscious of himself acts in a blind, instinctual way." And in many situations, people expect you to react blindly. They want to pull you into their energy. But when you don't take the bait, when you choose to remain aware, composed, deliberate, that's when you shift from being just another participant to becoming the center of gravity in the room. This isn't about being aloof. It's not about being cold. It's about being clear. You don't owe the room a reaction. You don't owe the attacker a response. What you owe yourself is the dignity to remain undisturbed, to choose not to be emotionally hijacked by people who thrive on emotional reactions. When you respond from presence, your silence isn't absence. It's fullness. It's depth. It's the visible weight of someone who doesn't need to win a moment because they've already won within. And let's be honest, people who seek to provoke are often revealing more about themselves than about you. A person secure in themselves doesn't need to tear others down. So when someone speaks from insecurity and you don't engage, it exposes the imbalance. The one trying to stir the waters ends up swimming alone. You don't throw them a life vest of attention. You let them see the waves they're making, and eventually they tire themselves out. Not because you silenced them, but because your presence made their noise echo louder than they expected. This kind of presence can't be faked. It's not about pretending to be unbothered. It's about actually being unbothered. It comes from a place of inner work, of deciding who you are before the world tells you who to be. The more you know yourself, the less you need others to validate you. And when that becomes your baseline, situations that once triggered you no longer touch you. You see them, you understand them, but you don't give them your energy. That's not suppression, that's sovereignty. People start treating you differently when they realize you're not easy to provoke. When they see that their words don't move you, their games lose their pull. It doesn't mean you'll never be challenged again, but it means you'll always have the upper hand, not because you're aggressive, but because you've built an inner home no one else can knock over. You've replaced the need to prove with the ability to simply be. And that change, that's what makes someone unforgettable. It's tempting to think that your voice will save you, that if you can just say the right thing, people will see your worth. But worth doesn't come from being understood. It comes from being unshaken. When your presence is strong enough, it speaks before you do. It fills the space without taking over. It makes people lean in, not because you're loud, but because your silence says more than noise ever could. That's when you move from being seen to being respected. So the next time you're in a room and someone tries to pull you into their drama, remember this: presence is louder than words. Your stillness is not a lack of power, it's the fullest expression of it. Let them talk, let them try, and let the moment speak for itself. Because when you refuse to react, when you choose to hold yourself with calm confidence, you shift the entire atmosphere. Not through force, not through speech, but through the kind of quiet certainty that leaves everyone else wondering what you know that they don't. That's the essence of presence, and it's worth more than any explanation you could ever offer. You don't build a strong reputation by constantly defending yourself. You build it by showing people, over time, what you consistently do when no one's watching, and even more so when everyone's watching. Especially in moments of tension, when eyes are on you, when the crowd waits to see if you'll fold, snap, explain, or retaliate. That's when you're defining yourself, not through words, but through your restraint. Because restraint is not silence born of fear, it's silence born of confidence. You don't stay quiet because you don't know what to say. You stay quiet because you already know who you are, and nothing in their accusation is worth compromising that knowing. Every time you withhold a reaction, you're choosing peace over performance, dignity over disturbance. That's something very few people master, because we live in a time when everyone's trying to set the record straight. We're told that to stay silent is to look guilty, that if we don't explain ourselves, we'll be misunderstood, and if we're misunderstood, we'll be rejected. But the truth is, constant explanation doesn't protect you from rejection. It often invites more of it. The more you try to justify yourself to others, the more openings you give them to question you. And before you know it, you're stuck in a loop of over-explaining and under-respecting your own boundaries. The one who feels compelled to argue their own integrity is often the one who ends up giving it away. Carl Jung wrote, "A man's worth is not measured by what he says about himself, but by what others infer through his silence." Think about that. Not what you say, but what your silence makes others consider. That's the quiet force of reputation. When you no longer feel the need to defend yourself against every doubt, you move from being someone others judge to someone they watch carefully. Not with suspicion, but with respect. Because when someone doesn't play the game, when they don't react the way most do, it makes people pause. It shifts attention from, "Are they right or wrong?" to, "What do they know that I don't?" You become harder to define, which means harder to dismiss. People might still talk, they might still misinterpret you, but eventually they grow tired of the effort. It's exhausting trying to provoke someone who won't respond. It's unsettling to speak badly of someone who never stoops to speak back. That's how you become powerful, without ever lifting your voice. Not by overpowering others, but by being unmoved by them. A storm can't shake what is rooted deep enough. And Stoicism has always taught this. Don't chase control over others. Cultivate control over yourself. That's where the power is. And here's something most people miss. Reputation built on words needs constant maintenance. It needs PR. It needs validation. But reputation built on restraint needs no defense. It carries its own momentum. People begin to speak on your behalf, not because you asked them to, but because your discipline earned their trust. You weren't reactive. You weren't desperate. You weren't driven by fear. And that's rare. In a world where many people explode at the first sign of disrespect, the person who remains calm becomes a mystery, a quiet force, someone whose opinion, presence, and energy carry more weight because they are not given lightly. And that mystery matters, because people can't respect what they feel they can control. They don't admire what they can predict. When you always explain yourself, they know what you'll say next. When you always react, they know how to get under your skin. But when you say little and hold steady, they start to wonder. And that wondering creates distance. Not coldness, respectful space. Because now, your silence isn't just absence, it's presence. It's the weight of someone who's not easily shaken. The crowd begins to watch you differently. They speak of you differently. They adjust themselves in your presence, not because you told them to, but because your restraint changed the temperature of the room. And that's influence. True influence. Not control through manipulation, but leadership through character. You lead by the way you hold yourself in moments of pressure. You lead by what you don't say. And when people realize that nothing they do can drag you into emotional chaos, they begin to trust that you're grounded. Because if you're grounded in the storm, you're likely grounded in the calm too. That's the person people want to follow. That's the kind of person people look to when things go sideways. The one who doesn't panic. The one who doesn't over-explain. The one who doesn't collapse. There's something almost spiritual about that kind of presence. It's not about ego. It's about alignment. It says, I know who I am, and I don't need to broadcast it. And ironically, that very energy does broadcast something loudly. It tells the world, this person is not here to impress you. They're here to embody something higher, something disciplined, something deeply self-respecting. And in that, they become magnetic, not by asking to be noticed, but by being worth noticing. Now think about what that kind of presence does over time. People forget your words, but they remember how you made them feel. And if your silence made them question themselves, if your restraint reminded them of their own chaos, they don't forget that. They might not even like it, but they respect it. That's how your name becomes a kind of energy. Something people feel even when you're not in the room. That's not arrogance. That's the result of living with such composure, such discipline, that your very existence becomes a reminder of what's possible when emotion doesn't run the show. Of course, it takes time. You don't build that reputation overnight. You build it in small, deliberate choices. Every time you resist the urge to clap back. Every time you hold your truth quietly, instead of parading it for approval. Every time you choose to remain whole, instead of reacting in pieces. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Because while others spend their energy trying to be liked, you spend yours becoming immovable. And eventually, they come to you, not for validation, but for stability, for guidance, for the strength you cultivated when no one was watching. And maybe that's the final reward. Not praise, not applause, but internal freedom. The freedom that comes when you no longer feel the need to explain who you are. When you can walk into any room, misunderstood or misjudged, and still remain completely centered. Because at that point, reputation is no longer something you manage, it's something you are, not built on words, not shaped by reactions, but forged in silence, reinforced by discipline, and carried with quiet certainty. That's the kind of reputation the Stoics would admire, not loud, not popular, but deeply respected, built not on defense, but on definition. The definition of someone who knows exactly who they are and no longer needs the world to confirm it. You don't have to fight to be understood. You just have to become so steady, so clear, so composed, that misunderstanding no longer shakes you. In a world full of noise, let your silence be the thing they remember. If this spoke to you, watch the next video on your screen. It's there to take you even deeper. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal.